basically it's a word that translates as rags. So it fits in really nicely with the eco methods that we do try and adopt. And what happened was old saris were used to create new coverings. A lot of the time it was for personal use. And it was just really, really interesting how they would, the coloured fabric or the coloured yarns have come from actually unweaving, yeah, the saris so that they had colour to stitch with. And they did all sorts of different patterns, which was just really, really interesting. And it's very, very old. So I can probably send this to Owen, but it's come out of a thrift of, you know, rural women needing, in the subcontinent, needing, if you like, to reuse what they'd got. And it's basically a style of running stitch, which is what I've just shown you, but it can also have other stitches in it as well. And it was something that was done by the more practical classes, and also the richer classes. So it wasn't something that, you know, was just for one type of, or one part of society. And what would happen is they'd make coverlets for babies and covers for people to sit underneath and bags and so on. So it's just really, really interesting in terms of how it came about out of necessity in a lot of the ways, like we have done for, you know, patchwork and so on. So it's, as I say, it was made for the Bengali area to start with, and it was used really to keep warm. Yeah, traditionally made out of cotton, because that was a lot easier to stitch with than using silks, which tends to slide around. And you can see it's got all the little running stitches, and by doing these running stitches you create patterns within patterns, and where the running stitches aren't, then you get sort of negative images, which is really nice. And what they did is they used geometric designs, which is partly what we're going to have a little go at today. And then they also did pictorial ones, telling stories, so passing on their tradition of stories through their embroidery. And I just find that really interesting. So we'll get the technique underway today, but maybe you'd like to tell your story or design your own. So this is a little fish that I've done. And that fish, I've incorporated some of the stitches that I like to do. So it's slightly not Kantha, but it's, you know, with that design of, I've got my main, you know, fish there, and then I've put some, if you like, little quilted areas around it to make it look as if it's in the water. So it's an opportunity, if you like, to use what is actually quite a nice and sort of simple design or simple practice, but to use it in a creative way. So are there any questions on that? Is that's where we're heading anyway. So that's the concept. So in your pack also, I've included a long darner needle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is kind of bendy. Now, I think some of you who've worked with me before know that I have a bit of a thing about these long darners, because they've got not too small an eye to them, but also because they're bendy, it lends itself really nicely to this technique. And the one that you've got in your pack is a 007, so think James Bond, and that's the size that it needs to be to come through the thicknesses of the fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to place the two thicknesses of fabric together, and you need that in order to create, you see the sort of puckering that occurs. Yeah. So you can use traditionally I've used cotton on the back of this for you, but they do also use muslin. Yeah, so you can actually, whatever you've got basically you can use, but I just felt that this was quite a nice thing to start with. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go onto my little visualizer, so just bear with me a minute. Oops. Try that again. Okay, so I've got a bigger piece here that I've started to work on just so that you can see it better. So I've got my squares, and the thing about working with Kantha is you don't start in the middle, you start from the outside of your work, and you work your way in. So that's the really different part. I've just got a little circle that I'm working with, and you see I've started from the outside and you come in. So it's very different from what we normally do, because I think intuitively you think, oh, okay, I'll start in the middle. The other thing that's also interesting is you don't do one section at a time. You go round in a circle, or you go around the square on ever decreasing squares to come to the centre. Okay, so that's quite nice because it sets your parameters. You're not thinking, where do I have to get to? It's where you're going to get into, which I think is quite nice as well. So the concept is then you're going to start off in any corner, and you're going to do a series of running stitches through all the thicknesses of the thread. So I've just started mine, and then you're going to come up and then go back down again and come up, and fill your needle till it's absolutely, you know, comfortable to work with.
So we don't split the thread then?
Yes. Now on yours, you can do as many threads as you like. You can do, the one I did here is just one strand of thread. And it's still quite effective, isn't it? You would think it was going to be thicker than that. But if you wanted to, you could do 2 strands. It's entirely up to you. I'd try with one, and then and you could also, I mean, I've put stranded threads in there so that you've got the the versatile approach to this, so you can, you know, decide how thick you want your finished fabric to be, finished threads to be. But you could use ordinary sewing threads, yeah, and that would work just as well. The one I'm doing here, the bigger one, I've actually, if I just hold it there a minute, that's a variegated thread. So just to show, you know, so it's one of these little variegated. This is a number 12 cotton perlé, which is quite a nice one to use as well. And the company Finca, Finca, manufacture that weight. So that's quite a nice one to use. And you could, if you wanted to, if you're doing a larger piece, you could actually do it with some thicker threads as well. It's entirely, you know, up to you. What's nice about this, and if you've just, you know, as we've just seen in the photos, people have interpreted it the way that fits their style. So that even though we're starting off with a very basic sort of style here, or technique, you will put your signature on it, okay? And it's absolutely fine to do that. I've used a friction pen to mark on where my lines are. And what we're going to do with this square is we're going to work in each square at a time. But what you can see with this then is, can you see that there are the 4 squares, because you can see the middles of it, but you create another shape as part of it.
Yes, it's amazing.
It's really clever, isn't it? And what I think is also worth thinking about is, you know, so this is, you know, two layers, 2 thicknesses of fabric, and it's substantial enough to think, yeah, I could use that as a cover in the summertime. It doesn't need any more than that. And it gets more rigid, it gets more hard, if you like, as you work it. So you're creating something there that has its own integrity because of the stitching that you've done. And those of you that perhaps done some quilting before, you know the more you quilt something, the more stiff the whole thing becomes. So this one is, you know, got that quality to it. And I just think it is also lovely, the fact that it creates patterns within patterns.
Did you say 1 thread? Sorry, Philippa, did you say 1?
Just 1 thread, yeah. So
do you start with a knot?
Yes, I started with a knot, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to and what I did is I very, very carefully tied just 1 knot into my thread, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I've come round, and all I'm doing is putting the thread through once to make the knot. So it's just a small knot, okay? And then I'm just going to trim the very long end off that. And I'm going to start now on another square. So what I did is I came up away from my work and where the line is. So I'm starting on the outside of the actual design. And so you see I've got the knot there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very gently tug it, says, bring it into and out of the way. I think I've got it caught inside, so that you tug it and it pulls up inside your 2 layers. So you're going to go in and then, yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just, I think I've got mine caught inside. I'm just going to do that again. So don't worry if it doesn't quite work the first time. So tie your knot, pull your thread through, and just trim the end. So I'm going up in between the layers of the fabric to where I want to start. Everybody see that okay? And I'm just going to pull that, and then in the pulling, you hear it go ping.
Yeah.
So I've disappeared my knot inside, okay? And then I'm going to start to do my stitching. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to go from right to left. If you're left-handed, go from obviously left to right. And I'm just doing little running stitches. So I'm using my finger underneath to push, yeah. So I'm using my finger here at the back to push the threads and the material along. And I'm doing little row of stitches. Now my stitches are about, let's say, 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch long. If you have a little look at my circle that's emerging, they're much longer. So they're more like 1 centimetre, 1/2 an inch long. So you're in charge of how big you want your stitches to be. So if I said to you that the shorter the stitches are, the more densely this is going to be, and the longer the stitches, the less dense it will be, and it won't be quite as stiff. So you can use your stitch length as a method to change the feel, if you like, of the finished piece.
Are we doing the inner squares or are we doing the outer border bit?
So we're going all the way around each square, coming in and into the middle.
Have I drawn too much?
No, that's right. No, that's right. So if you imagine, I'm just going to, so I'll show you on mine here. Yeah, mine's bigger just so that you can see it.
Oh,
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
We're doing the 4 smaller ones, yeah, rather than the large outer one.
That's right. So you each small square you do individually so that it will look like that.
Yeah.
It's done. Yeah.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
And that will then create your sub patterns. Yeah. So if I go back to my original one like that, so that there are my four small squares that I've done separately, and they've created that nice diamond design. And it's pretty straightforward to do, isn't it? It's quite fast to draw it onto the fabric, so that's really good.
Which two did you use? The heavier duty calico backing the lighter duty cotton, or the same?
I've done it both ways, so it's up to you. You decide. Yeah. So on this one, I've got the calico on the top and my cotton underneath.
But you use two different.
I've got my cotton on the top and I've got the calico underneath.
Yeah.
It was just so that you've got a choice about the colours, really. And traditionally, if you imagine, they would have used cotton usually, and it's that very, very fine cotton, you know, that you get from India, sort of like a bit sort of heading towards muslin, but a little bit stronger than that. And I think they call it dobby or dobbin, something like that. But we're using it on a thicker scale. And then, as I said, what they would do is then fray the saris to create their fabric, their threads. So everything was used, which is just really nice. So a lot of the time you'd see the cheaper cotton, if you like, to create the base, and then they would use the sari silks, because a lot of them were made in silk, as the threads. So it became a new thing again, which I think is just really, really nice. I think this is kind of quite mindful because you can just sit and go round in squares or circles or whatever. And what you're trying to do, let me just say this, once you've gone round once, you're trying then to go on the next row parallel to the row you've just done. So that's what's happening all the way through.
So once you've set the size of your stitch, then you're sort of guided by that.
You are, unless you're doing the circle. Because obviously as you get closer to the middle, you have less space. So when you start to do curves, then the stitch inherently will become smaller.
Yeah.
As you get to the center. Okay, but obviously with the squares, it's not quite so critical.
And all your stitches are next to each other on the next row. Is that right? So that the gaps and the stitches are all level
Lined up.
with each other.
They're all lined up. So if you have a little look on mine here,
yeah,
they all line up, and that's very typical then of the Kantha work that we know. So that's what's nice about this, is that you don't have to really worry. Once you've got your guidelines in, you just sit and stitch it. So turn left or right, depending on left-handed or right-handedness, on that diagonal line. And match up then with the next set of stitches. So
the corner ones are going to be shorter.
They gradually
They are
appear, don't
sometimes. So if I just show you on here, yeah, just keep matching it on that diagonal. So there's my diagonal line there. So some of these are a little bit shorter.
Ah, yeah.
But I'm working towards keeping them running parallel with each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't fit a stitch in on the corner. So if I can show you, is that too high, or is that the right place?
That's right.
As I've turned here, I haven't managed to put a stitch under that outer border. I've just left the gap, and then I've just worked to the next stitch. And I think the other thing is, it's not prescriptive. So it's not that idea of working with canvas and everything and cross stitch and everything's got to be meticulous here. This is about joining up two layers of fabric with a decorative element to it. So if you don't get quite a whole stitch there, it doesn't matter, as long as you keep running the stitches parallel to each other all the way through. On the handout, which I will send to Owen, you've got it, haven't you, Owen, of the templates. So on the handout, you've also got a template for, I'll just show, for a paisley shape and also for a circle. Okay, so you can, if you wanted to, with your other bits of fabric that have been included, you could actually create those if you wanted to, and just have a play with the different shapes. So curves are a little bit more interesting to do. What I found on mine was I drew the design on a little bit, just so that I had an idea of what I was going to do. I think it's oftentimes quite useful if you're doing, I mean, the square was quite straightforward in my head. I could picture that, but with the circle, for example, here, I don't know if you can see it there. What I've done is I've just drawn on where I think the lines should go, so that I'd tested it out on paper first, just to make sure that I was happy with what I was trying to achieve. So it saved me a lot of time thinking, oh, I don't like it that way. And it also helped me to work out the spacing. So that was what I drew, and I realised I'd actually drawn too many lines in. So on my actual piece, you see I've reduced the number slightly, a couple of bits late, and I've done them slightly longer just to make it a little bit more dramatic. So my stitches on the outside are longer than the ones that I drew. So, you know, don't feel like you've got to go straight to the fabric. You know, always think, oh, right, let me just get a feel for how that's going to work. And the templates, you know, you could hopefully just photocopy them. You could just draw onto them. I just use pencil